At last, the day has arrived. The game that everybody has been talking about for the past 6 weeks in college football. The defending national champions from Nebraska, playing their arch rivals from Oklahoma, ranked number 2. And of course, it is a sellout crowd here at Owen Field in Norman, Oklahoma.
I think a lot of the people in Nebraska have narrowed it down to almost a one-game season where you can do pretty well, but if you don't beat Oklahoma, you've had a bad year. So naturally, there's a lot of heat on us to win.
The comments of the head coaches of Oklahoma and Nebraska. College football today from Lincoln, Nebraska's Memorial Stadium. The Big 8 shootout between these two offensive giants. Number 1 ranked Oklahoma against number 4 ranked Nebraska.
11 times in the last half century, one of these two schools has been crowned national champion. Nebraska and Oklahoma, the Huskers and the Sooners. So many times, so many big games.
It always had national significance because whoever won this went to the Orange Bowl and played in the Orange Bowl for the national championship.
You knew that it was going to be a top-of-the-line game that that was going to stretch you to the fullest.
It wasn't just me and Tom Osborne standing on the sidelines. We both had good football players.
Great players, All-Americans and Heisman winners. Players who produce moments forever burned into our college football memories.
Of course, the 1971 game where we were ranked 1 and 2, a great football game.
To the 40, to the 35, to the 20, to the 10. He's all the way home.
There was something about us having the ability in the fourth quarter to make enough plays to win the football game.
He throws it. He hits low. He pitches it to Peacock. First down.
And the tough thing was if you lost it, you had to live with it for a year.
It was games like this that you didn't have to worry about getting your team ready to play.
And so fitting that the final championship game features two rivals connected across time.
He's all the way home!
Across borders, before the Republic was even formed. But territory is still turf, home soil, and the schools that stand on it are symbols of the proud states they serve. So when these teams meet, there's more than a game on the line, even when the Big 12 title is at stake like today. No, this one is about legacies and long-held grudges. This is Exhibit A for rivalry, for what the word truly means. This is Oklahoma versus Nebraska, the land, the people, and their teams.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast, the Husker Fan Sports Show.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast. I'm your host, Honky, and I'm with Boomer.
Well, glad to be back on the show. I was attempting a merger with some Big 12 and Pac-12 podcasts, but that kind of fell through. The media dollars didn't come through like I hoped. UCF podcasts just don't bring the value that you'd like to see. So I'm back with you guys for another season.
Another season it is. Yeah. Season 7 of the Redcast. Who'd have thought? We'd make it 7 seasons. Crazy, huh?
Given our records, I'm kind of surprised we have. So.
Well, tonight we are joined by the Husker historian himself, Mike Babcock, editor at Hail Varsity. Welcome back to the Redcast, Mike.
Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Age is about the only thing I have that I can say, yes, that's true.
Well, a lot has happened since the last time we had you on. It was actually February of 2020. It was the month before COVID. It was our last show before COVID. It was when we had you on. We did a Husker History 101. We'll probably put the link to that in the description here because we posted that out to YouTube as well. So that's a great hour plus of listening pleasure. That was an audio only show. This time we have Mike in the flesh here. And tonight we're going to be talking about Nebraska and Oklahoma, a great rivalry there. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to promote an upcoming show and also talk about some of our sponsors. Next up on Monday night, July 25th at 8 p.m., we'll have Paul Jacobson, a Nebraska football audio historian. You can find him at Husker Tapes on Twitter and Historical Husker Media on YouTube. And you're going to see some of his work throughout the course of this show tonight. Also, of course, our promo code Redcast, go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe. Mike would like you to go there, subscribe to Hail Varsity. And if you use Redcast, you can get $10 off your subscription for the year there. So make sure you go down there and do that, Redcasters. Also, we have Alumni Hall with 2 Lincoln locations. They still have their downtown one at 1120 P Street, but they have opened a new one at South Point Pavilions. 2910 Pine Lake Road. It's right behind Barnes & Noble. And, of course, you can find them online, alumnihall.com/Nebraska-Cornhuskers. Also, FSC Edge. Are you looking to make a career change? Then FSC Edge is the place for you. You'll get a chance to work with fun people with great attitudes, all the while learning about patents. You're not on the phone. You're not customer-facing, so casual dress is the norm, but you'll have access to generous benefit packages while doing impactful work on a national scale. So if this sounds like what you're looking for, then check out the available jobs at www.jobs@fscedge or fsc.com. It confuses me because FSC, and I'm so used to saying FCS, Boomer. It just gets me.
Football on the brain.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, our good friends at Smack and Smooch, Shane and Laura in Elwood, custom shirts and specialty items. You can see their QR code here. You can also find them at Smack and Smooch on Twitter and Facebook. I am wearing my Husker or my Redcast polo that they made me. They're also getting into some hats, and they've been doing koozies. Boomer, you have your Redcast polo over there. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, some great sponsors there. Go and support all of them, Redcasters. But back to the show. And for those young Redcasters out there, they may not fully comprehend the history of this rivalry, but this year marks the 88th year of the 88th time of this rivalry. So to bring a little order to how we're going to break this down, we're going to do this into 4 chunks. We're going to do a segment on the early years, which we're defining as 1912 to 1961. The Devaney Era is 1962 to 72. Then there's the Osborne Era, 73 to 97. And then the Modern Era, 1998 to now. And with the help of our good friends at Wikipedia, as you can see here, this is going to be the 88th year. And what you'll notice as you look at this is that there's a lot of streaks. Any of the red lines represents a Nebraska victory, and the gold lines going down there, those are Oklahoma ones. So you see a lot of streaks.
Geometry paid off for you in high school.
Yeah, thank you.
I like that.
Thank you very much. But it's been a streaky series, as I think we'll get to talking about. Nebraska's largest margin of victory was 69-7. We've had 7 straight was our longest streak. In Oklahoma, their biggest victory was 48-0 in 1949, and their longest streak was 16. So, before we get into the segments and everything, Mike, I want to start with you. Just in general, I guess when we think about Nebraska and Oklahoma, what's some of the first things that come to mind with this, with the rivalry and everything about the two programs?
Well, because I have read about the history of what this is, the thing that always gets me about the Nebraska-Oklahoma rivalry is how they became conference members, how they got together. They had played in 1912. They played in 1912. It was a non-conference game. I think Oklahoma initially was in the Southwest Conference. And in 1919, I need to get my dates straight here. I forget things pretty easily. In 1919, Nebraska scheduled Oklahoma as a non-conference game in Omaha as part of a doubleheader. Creighton played Marquette, and Nebraska played Oklahoma. And Nebraska basically picked up the tab for this whole thing. It's in Oklahoma. The Missouri Valley Conference, of which Nebraska was a member, I think there were 9 schools in the conference at the time, had instituted a policy where you played your home games in the hometown. In other words, Nebraska played its home games in Lincoln. It didn't play them anywhere else. That was the rule. And when Nebraska decided to play this doubleheader, there were some alums in Omaha that convinced them to do it. Nebraska was suspended from the league. Now, it was too late to change the schedule in 1919, so Nebraska still played some of the Missouri Valley Conference foes in that year. But Nebraska played Oklahoma in this doubleheader. One of the histories of Nebraska said there were 40 punts in the 2 games. The Marquette-Creighton game ended up in a scoreless tie. The Nebraska-Oklahoma game ended up in a 7-7 tie. And the result was Nebraska came out $2,000 ahead, which the history said had Nebraska played the game in Lincoln, it would have made just as much money. Okay.
Neutral site games, even then.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Nebraska is suspended from the conference in 1920. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Who is brought into the conference to replace Nebraska?
Grinnell?
Missouri Valley Conference, 1920.
Boomer Sooner.
Oklahoma.
Oh, well, Grinnell was 1919, and Oklahoma was 1920.
Yeah, Grinnell. If you look at the old facade on the east side of the stadium, you see all these schools up there, and you see Grinnell, you see Drake, you see Washington of Missouri, with the Kansas Aggies or whatever. And it's like, what are those schools doing up there? Nebraska was in a conference with them. That's what they're doing up there.
Yeah, the Missouri Valley at the time.
Anyway, so that's how Oklahoma got in the conference. Then in 1921, Nebraska asked to be reinstated into the conference, was allowed back into the conference. And so now you've got Nebraska and Oklahoma are conference rivals. And from that point on, there were only 2 years that Nebraska and Oklahoma didn't play until 1995 when the Big 12 was established. So it's like, how did they get in the same conference? Well, they played this game that got Nebraska suspended from the conference, and then Oklahoma took that place. Eventually, Oklahoma State was added briefly. The feeling was there's too many schools in this conference now, because I think it was up to 10. And in about 1928, I might be wrong by a year or so, 6 schools broke off into the Big Six. It was Oklahoma, it was Nebraska, it was Missouri, it was Iowa State, it was Kansas State, it was Kansas. And it was the Big Six until 1947. Colorado came in. I think 1960, Oklahoma State came in. So Nebraska, Oklahoma, that's where the tradition began. And as you know, early on, Nebraska dominated. I think winning 16 of the first 22 games between the schools. So that's what I always think of. It's just like this weird bit of history. How did they get together? And then in that time frame, the first time frame you're talking about, the other thing I think of is the 59 game, obviously.
Sure, yeah.
A lot of people do. Because there's, up to that point, after Nebraska dominated, then Oklahoma dominated, and from 1943 through 58, Oklahoma beat Nebraska 16 in a row, and kind of dominated the conference. Even though and during that time, 53 to 57, Bud Wilkinson had that 47 game winning streak, which will probably never be broken. And then he had I think it was a 31 game conference winning streak, which ended in, I know the 1950 Nebraska game when Oklahoma beat Nebraska, that was the 30th win in that streak. So Oklahoma kind of became a dominant force. And so I'm rambling here, but the 59 game, if we want to talk about that a little, there's a lot of intrigue.
We will get to it for sure.
But yeah, the first thing I think of is how did they get to be conference rivals? The second thing I think of is the 78 game, because that was the first year I was at the Lincoln Journal and Star. It was my first Nebraska-Oklahoma game to cover, and it remains my favorite Nebraska game of all time because of that. I grew up with the Nebraska Oklahoma rivalry, and Bob Devaney was a big factor in that, getting things turned around on that. And I was younger and thought I'd never heard of Bob Devaney, so I didn't know why they'd hired him. But
well, I mean, Boomer, I think that's a great intro for you. Then, I mean, when you think at a high level, what do you think of when you hear the OU series?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I grew up in Texas originally, and this was the only real exposure I ever had to Nebraska growing up down there, particularly in the era we grew up in when every game wasn't on TV. You only saw a handful a year, and this would be the one Nebraska game that I would regularly see on TV, after Thanksgiving. And, so that was probably my first exposure to Nebraska and just in general, just watching this game. So it's always kind of had some meaning there. And the first game I ever attended live in person was a Nebraska-Oklahoma game. It would have been, what year would that have been?
Was that the 91 one?
It was 91, and it was just freaking ice cold. It was freezing rain after Thanksgiving. I have never been more cold in my life, except for maybe at the game in Kansas City in the snow when we played Oklahoma as well. There's just something about freezing in Oklahoma, it just goes with me, I guess. But so there's always just kind of been a connection just as far as Nebraska, Oklahoma, that just my initial exposures to Nebraska have always come through the Oklahoma games. So it's always kind of been of interest there for me.
Well, one of the things I think about is how this is a unique rivalry. And Mike, I think you said it perfectly, where it's not a traditional rivalry where you're not in-state hatred. It's not a, Kansas K-State or Oklahoma State. It's not border rivals. We're not Kansas, Missouri. We're not Michigan, Ohio State. Geographically and historically, it doesn't make a lot of sense, yet it was all about what went on the field. And then there's this mutual respect. And I want to show this little clip here. And this is from Lyle Bremser at the beginning of the game of the century, talking about the Oklahoma fans. I think this was interesting.
And let me say that the fans here at Oklahoma have been very, very fine all the way. Very fine, very fine. Not out of line at any time. And they treat the Nebraska fans with great respect. And I have not heard of one thing other than that.
So there you are, going into the Oklahoma-Nebraska, the great 1971 game that we're going to get to. But you have all the makings of this hatred and just, being mean and terrible to each other like we see in so many games. And Oklahoma fans treated Nebraskans, with the utmost respect, according to Bremser there. And Nebraska fans pride ourselves on returning that. Doesn't mean it didn't get heated at times, don't get me wrong, but it's just that's something that's, I think, unique and special about this rivalry too, just from the start, But let's get to talking about that. Let's get into this first era. I'm going to find this. Here we go. And the early years, 1912 to 1961, Nebraska went 18-20 and had 3 ties during this time. And Mike, as you were explaining here, during this era, Nebraska dominated the beginning, as we see, and then Oklahoma went on their tear. So I'll start with you, Mike, here. Let's go back to 1912. Something that you and Boomer have in common, Jumbo Steam, a love of Jumbo Steam. It starts in 1912. We get through let's talk about the teens and let's talk about the 20s. Let's kind of stay in that era right now and start talking about this. So go, Mike.
Well, I should defer to Boomer because he's probably the Steam expert here.
Well, it's just that was the original meeting of the teams was 1912, Nebraska, Oklahoma. And that kind of in a lot of ways set the tone for what the rivalry was going to be. It was a game finished 13-9, but Oklahoma scored first. And Vic Halligan had a quality comeback game in that, leading Nebraska on a couple of touchdown drives to score and take the lead. And it was kind of the beginnings of almost what Sooner magic happened. They got the ball the last bit of the game and went on two big plays and got the ball down in Nebraska territory and just fell short. They ran out of time and game ended 13-9. That would have been, pretty shocking upset for a Jumbo Steam team. As you all know, he was a fairly decent coach for us. If you have watched the show before, I like to bring that up on occasion. That
you like a statue built.
Yeah, a statue would be nice. Just something simple like that. Nothing tacky or tasteless. But that really kind of set the tone, I think, for the rivalry to come. Just that very first meeting we had. Mm-hmm. And there was a kind of a different era back then too. Oklahoma was kind of known as the pass heavy team back then. They were well known for airing the ball out. Nebraska took the opposite approach. We like to run and use a lot of misdirection and things like that. So it was just kind of set that other tone for just difference in styles and things.
What would airing the ball out mean back then? Is that like 8 passes a game?
Yeah, more. Yeah, sometimes it could be that many or more. But yeah, they threw the ball quite a bit actually. If you go back and read all the literature and read the newspaper clippings in the yearbook, they talk about how Oklahoma would throw the ball a lot. It was a Southerners thing to do, is how they put it. On some of the terminology I read. And Nebraska might throw the ball a couple times, maybe. So
But Steam didn't do that though.
No. So
his teams were just really aggressive, and if you got hurt, you didn't come out, because if you did come out, you might never play again.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how demanding Jumbo Steam was, and I don't think they called them the Steamrollers. I'm not sure that he necessarily appreciated that. From what I've read in some of the student the yearbooks and the student newspaper or whatever, but they were a grinded out kind of team. So Oklahoma was probably lucky that it only played Nebraska that 1 year, because when Steam was the coach, because I think he probably would have done some damage. In fact, Minnesota, the first 2 years Nebraska lost to Minnesota, And those were the only 2 losses, I think, during Steam's tenure. He was 35-2-3. And then the third year, they beat Minnesota, and Minnesota dropped them. Minnesota, the coach / athletic director or whatever, the guy that ran the program, he was so upset that he just dropped them from the schedule. They beat him.
Nebraska is the only team to have a winning record against the Four Horsemen, and then Notre Dame dropped us.
Yeah.
But
Steam apparently.
Although, that had more to do with the Klan having an office in Lincoln, a building here, and the treatment of the Notre Dame fans in what was it, the last year that they played that game, 1923.
That sounds right. Yeah.
So 23 or 25. I'm one of those, but that's why that was discontinued. Newt Rockne wanted to keep playing, wanted the series to go on because it was a good moneymaker for Notre Dame to come to Lincoln because of the number of fans that came here and the revenue it generated. But the administration at Notre Dame said no, the way the fans were treated, and they made the halftime show. They made fun of the Four Horsemen. They made them out as hod carriers, which meant the implication was that they got paid to play.
So that was not as respectful of a rivalry as what we're.
No, that was not.
Nebraska. It wasn't respectful. And NIL hadn't quite taken off yet either. So a little different era. There were underlying reasons that that came to an end, and then they didn't play again until the 40s. And Nebraska didn't do very well there, but Tom Novak did. He earned a lot of respect in the way he played against Notre Dame. But
he was a good.
I digress.
So Boomer, I guess we kind of get through the teens, and a lot's starting to happen with Nebraska football as we're getting into the 20s. They're going to be building a stadium. I mean, what's starting to happen now in those early 20s here?
Well, Mike had said, we joined the same conference. We're both in the Missouri Valley, soon to become the Big Six, Big Eight, and started playing, on basically an annual basis. And the series kind of kept going the way it had been. Nebraska dominated those early games. Again, same kind of thing. Oklahoma was pass heavy. We tended to run the ball a lot more. I know in the 22 game, we aired it out for Nebraska purposes and scored 3 of our 6 touchdowns by passing. So that kind of caught everyone off guard. But and then I think the next real big moment in the series was in 1923, which is the first game ever played in what was going to be Memorial Stadium. So Nebraska, Oklahoma, they were our first game played then, and no grass had been installed yet, so they played on dirt. And it kind of a unique situation. It's the first game played there, and it was also kind of the OG of the alternate uniforms for Nebraska. We wore blue actually in that game. So if anyone's excited to see us wear blue maybe this year against Oklahoma, we could really bring something back. I'm sure
that was
that. Yeah.
Oklahoma brought up its maroon jerseys or whatever, and they couldn't figure out how to differentiate the team. So Nebraska agreed to wear a different colored jersey so they could differentiate. So that was, that was what caused them to do that. And it wasn't the dedication game. The dedication game was against Kansas, which Nebraska had played the dedication game at Kansas Stadium, and same way here. But yeah, that was the first game played there.
So I guess, we're now, Mike, I'll kind of hand it back over to you. We're getting into the 20s here. And is that Dana X Bible at that point?
No, he was in the 30s.
First,
Fred Dawson.
Fred Dawson first, and then, when Bible, I think he played against he won the last 6. I know that against Oklahoma, and then he took off. And who replaced him?
Oh gosh, who was after Bible? What year did he leave?
Would that have been like Biff Jones, or
that might be about right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, that might be.
Yeah, that sounds right. So.
Well, to keep going, to kind of reiterate, to go back to this right now, we're about mostly through the red here as we're getting into the 30s, so we dominate this whole first part of the series, everything through the teens, through the 20s. We start getting into the 30s, and then that would be the Bible years, and yeah, he won like 6 in a row. Or Nebraska was having a lot of success against Oklahoma at this time.
Yeah, in the conference as well,
and in the conference as well. So what starts to happen in the 30s? What's the transition that starts to? Well, I guess it would have been all the way. It's the 41 season is our last really good year at that point, where we go to the 40 season where we go to the Rose Bowl. But what starts to change? What happens where
something happened in 41 that kind of
the war had some effect here, but it had an effect negatively on Nebraska. But also, what happens with Oklahoma? When do they start to get it turned around, Mike?
I never did figure out what changed for Oklahoma. Some of it had to be population based and the proximity to Texas, because of your ability to get more athletes. Although, the Rose Bowl team, Nebraska had every player on the team except one was from Nebraska. There was one guy from Kansas on that team. And one thing that did change, and I couldn't give you a time frame, but I know it was in this general time frame, was that some schools were effectively giving players scholarships or paying them to play. That was one of the things, and Nebraska didn't do that. Players could get jobs. They helped them do that, but they didn't pay them. And I remember reading a story in a newspaper account from about 1941 or 42, somewhere in there, where players were talking about having talked to players from the other team when they came up to Lincoln to play the game. And they were talking about, well, we get this and this and this. You don't get anything like that? And the Nebraska guy had said, no, we don't get anything like that. I really believe that's one of the things that changed. And Nebraska didn't start giving scholarships on a consistent basis until the 50s. But I think other programs did. And Oklahoma could have been one of those. I'm not saying it was, but there was that possibility, I think, that enabled programs to develop, because they had if you call it scholarships or whatever it was, they were giving these players an opportunity to make some money in doing this.
I think Wilkinson even got Oklahoma on probation a couple times, I think, in the 50s for
that's
slush fund. Yeah, so
there's some drama there. Yeah, Oklahoma went on there was a probation year in 56. I know that. And then there was one in 73, and I think there was one before 56. That's part of the intrigue of the 59 Nebraska-Oklahoma game.
Well, let's get to that, actually. So basically, we know that Oklahoma started to turn it around. Nebraska went downhill in the 40s, and over the course of the 40s and 50s, that's when Oklahoma had their long win streak. And this is something you mentioned this when we did our Husker History 101. You mentioned it before this show too. Oklahoma didn't have a conference winning streak; they had a conference unbeaten streak, right? Going into the 59 game, and of course, the 59 game. Some of the intrigue too is we're coached by Bill Jennings, who was an former Oklahoma coach there, and it was a huge upset here. We're going to show the video here. Leroy Zentik getting a punt return.
Lincoln East High coach,
long time.
Jackie Holt split wide to the right side. Quick kick for the Sooners. It's partially blocked as Cornell trying to get that one off. The ball is rolling free. One of the Huskers has it. It could be going all the way. It's Leroy Zentik to the 5. He's over. Leroy Zentik picked up that loose ball. There's a flag, however, on the 22, but the penalty must Oklahoma. Leroy Zentik picked up that loose ball. We could have the upset of the year in the making.
The upset of the year in the making, Mike.
Oh, yeah. I've got a program from that game.
Oh, so, what did that game mean at that moment? I mean, how big of an upset was that? I mean, to try to put that in perspective for the Redcasters that maybe don't have as clear of a memory there of it.
Okay, so you got the 74 game conference unbeaten streak. There's 2 ties involved in that. You've got the little. Okay, so let's go back to 1958 February. Nebraska upsets Wilt Chamberlain in Kansas. Okay, huge upset. Although people think Kansas was number one, Kansas wasn't number one. I think it was either number 6 or number 4, something like that. But Wilt Chamberlain didn't make any difference where they were ranked. It's Wilt Chamberlain, and they had beaten Nebraska earlier in the season, I think 102 to something, and Chamberlain outscored Nebraska or 104 to something, and the headline in the newspaper said Wilt Chamberlain 52, Nebraska, or Wilt Chamberlain 52, Kansas 52, Nebraska like 40 something or whatever. Then Nebraska comes back and beats Kansas in Lincoln. Jim Kabaki hits a shot, and it's a big upset. So the students go to the Chancellor, Clifford Harden, and say, we want classes canceled on Monday because of this big victory. And Harden says, okay, we have one stipulation. Classes are canceled, but they will not be canceled ever again until Nebraska beats Oklahoma. Okay. This is in February 1958. So now we're October 31st, 1959. It's Halloween for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the last game of the conference season for Nebraska. It's one of 3 times that Oklahoma wasn't from 1950 to 95. You've got Jennings, who went to Norman High School. He played football at Norman High School. Then he was an assistant coach at Oklahoma. And the story was that the investigation, which led to the penalty in the NCAA penalty in 1956, the 1-year penalty, was involved in recruiting infractions, and that Jennings was sort of the recruiting coordinator for Oklahoma. He ended up being the fall guy, supposedly, for this whole investigation after the 53 or 54 season when the investigation is going on. So Oklahoma gets him a job with an oil company and releases him, as part of this investigation on the recruiting violations thing. Okay, so 1956, Nebraska hires Pete Elliott, who had been an assistant at Oklahoma. He comes to Nebraska and he gets Bill Jennings as an assistant, gets him back into coaching, brings him up here. So Pete Elliott coaches 1 year and then takes off for California, and Bill Jennings succeeds him as coach. So that's how Bill has got there. All right. Now, the other bit of intrigue and where this fits in here is supposedly Jennings and Wilkinson had an agreement that if Nebraska was recruiting anybody in Oklahoma, Jennings would let Wilkinson know about it, and Wilkinson would sign off on it, or he would quit doing it. And if Wilkinson was recruiting anybody in Nebraska, Jennings would have to sign off on it, and if he didn't, then Wilkinson would back away. Except that Oklahoma was interested enough in Monty Kiffin that Wilkinson flew up to Lexington, Nebraska to talk to Monty Kiffin, and Jennings found out about it and got upset about it. Okay, so we got all this going on. Now they play the game. Nebraska pulls the upset, ends this conference unbeaten streak, and Oklahoma was 4-3 at that point. Nebraska was 2-4, I think, going into that game. And there's more. Oklahoma has another 1-year probation thing in 1960. And there's all this, it's Jennings' fault. He's blowing the whistle on Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma tries to blow the whistle on Nebraska for recruiting some guy in Wichita, Kansas that didn't end up coming to Nebraska. So when Nebraska plays Oklahoma in 1960, the year after that, Nebraska wins again. And Jennings has to have a police escort off the field because the fans are so irate about it. So you talk about drama. There was all this drama going on that involved a guy who had gone to Norman High School and had been coached there by a guy who coached at Oklahoma before Jim Tatum, and then the Bud Wilkinson thing. So there was a lot of drama in that 59 game underneath the game itself, not just to mention, how it came out.
So that
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I mean that starts to wrap up kind of the 50s, gets us into the 60s, and like you said, that Nebraska even won in 60, and then in 61, Oklahoma wins that game, and that's the final game of the Jennings era against Oklahoma, and that kind of closes out. If we go back to what the early years are, we're saying this segment this goes to 61. So Mike, if I could kind of maybe synopsis of what we just got done talking about, that this first era here. Right here, so 18, 20, and 3, 1912 to 1961, kind of a synopsis of this era. Where are we at in the program leaving this as Devaney starting to come in? Because we're going to get into the Devaney era next. But like right now, I mean, how do we kind of put a bow on everything that's happened up to this point in the series?
Well, for Nebraska, Oklahoma, we see where Oklahoma's going with this 47-game winning streak from 53 to 57, and then this conference unbeaten streak of 74 games. Oklahoma had things rolling. Nebraska was going through coaches trying to find somebody. Bill Glassford had he had a winning season or two in there, but Nebraska just didn't have any success. I mean, Jennings didn't have a winning season. Elliott didn't have a winning season, and there was a lot of drama with the end of the Glassford era. There was a kind of a player revolt started by some alumni in Omaha and a petition to get rid of him and so forth. And he backed away, even though he had another year on his contract. I think he said, I don't need any more of this. I'm out of here. Nebraska was trying to get some stability in coaching, which it really hadn't had since the Rose Bowl. Mm-hmm. I mean, Nebraska didn't have but maybe 2 winning seasons. Maybe not. Yeah. 2 winning seasons and a 500 season from the Rose Bowl up until including the 59 game.
Mm-hmm. So really up until the very recent era of Husker football, the down years of Nebraska football were the 40s and the 50s.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so really that is what Devaney is kind of inheriting as he's starting to come in. Hey, Redcast Rob, I know you're on the back end here doing some producing for us. Do we have any questions that have come in so far from the listeners? All right, or the viewers. We have Abby Harris. Why do you think the Nebraska-Oklahoma rivalry was more respectful than any other Nebraska rivalry? Mike?
I think some of it was that, again, Oklahoma's bitter rival was Texas. There was a lot of bitterness there. Nebraska, because of the lack of success that we talked about during those times, probably didn't have any position to be abrasive to anybody. Mm. And I think the connection. I'm going to fast forward because I think the respectfulness was towards the end of the Devaney era and during the Osborne era. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot of respectfulness when Osborne got done, and then you look at it beyond that. I don't think there was so much respect. You talk about we can talk about it later. The 2004 game that kind of reflected where that thing was at that point. But Osborne and Switzer maintained some contact. I think a lot of people didn't realize that. I think Barry Switzer, even though there was a lot of controversy about when he ended up his time at Oklahoma. I remember going down to, I've probably mentioned this before, but I remember going down to Oklahoma the week of the Nebraska game when it was going to be played in Norman, and the newspaper would send me down there and we'd write about the game coming up, and I did it once or twice. And the Oklahoma people were just extremely cordial. I mean, Mike Treps was the sports information director. He had begun his career as a TV broadcaster at KHS TV in Hastings, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. I remembered watching wrestling, and he was the voice, the KHS TV wrestling guy. He was the SID. So I'd go down there. It was like you had access to whatever you wanted. They were just very, very accommodating. Barry Switzer always called me by a first name. It wasn't my name, but I think it was Bob. It was always considered. It was just a cordial kind of a thing. And I think it carried over, because the coaches maintained some contact and because Nebraska fans were, I think, really respectful. And again, I don't know whether that was a reflection of what Osborne said when they played Oklahoma or what Oklahoma had accomplished or whatever. Wasn't the same way with Missouri. It wasn't the same way with Colorado, but it certainly was with Oklahoma. And I think it began with, it had to do a lot with the coaches. And, Devaney coached Chuck Fairbanks at Michigan State. Devaney was an assistant coach there. And Fairbanks, although there was a little friction there in the 68 game, ended up 47-0 Oklahoma, and Bob was not, or was it 68 game. Bob wasn't real happy with that. He thought they ran up the score. So in 69, Nebraska beat Oklahoma 44-14. And,
we got him back.
Yeah, got him back. But I saw the same thing. That's a good question, because I saw the same thing. A respect that wasn't there for some other programs that was there for Oklahoma. And it was very frustrating. So, Bob's record was 5-6 against Oklahoma. Tom's record was, till Switzer left, was 5-12. And then when Switzer left, it was 8-1 after that.
That's right. Well, Redcasters, we're going to go to part 2 here. Buckle up. This is going to be a nice show. We got a ways to go in this. But we're going to, when we get done with this, we're going to segment it up too onto YouTube. So each of these eras will have its own segment. And so there'll be plenty of ways to watch this. But let's move into the next one here. And part 2, the Devaney Era, 1962 to 72. And as you just said there, Mike, NU went 5-6 during that time. As we look at the win-loss here, there was a little bit of back and forth at the beginning. Oklahoma winning the first one, Nebraska going back and forth there. But then kind of as we see throughout the course of this, Oklahoma has a streak of 3 wins, Nebraska has a streak of 3 wins, and then Oklahoma wins the last one. So let's start it off here. Let's go to 1962. Devaney is brought in. It's his first year, and Wilkinson is towards the tail end of his career at Oklahoma. And Mike, I'll kind of let you start there. 1962.
Okay, it's not. So 1962, that game is not on commercial television, but it is presented on closed circuit on the big screen at Pershing Auditorium. And I came down from my hometown of York with some friends to see that game on the big screen. And you went in there, and it was on, I think, 4 sides, and you could see it. And the telecast wasn't that great. It didn't turn out, but neither was the game. So, and the only thing I remember about it is Jim Babcock and a block punt. I mean, it was 34-6, wasn't that the final score? It wasn't.
Sounds right.
I had all these high hopes, because Nebraska, Devaney's first loss was to Missouri, 16-7, and it looked like, hey, things are really looking good here. And then it turned out to be not such a good game there.
So
Oklahoma dominated.
We lose that first time to Oklahoma, but in season 2, 1963, we get that first win. But that game is probably more noted for the timing of the game. Saturday, November 23rd, the day after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And I've read some things and seen some things about how Bud Wilkinson, I think he was on some different like national, boards that he knew JFK and made some statement that I think JFK would want the game being played and that we were one of the only games that was played because a lot of them were being canceled that weekend, right?
Yeah. I think there was a quote in the newspapers about that JFK would have wanted this game to be played. I think the driving force behind it to a good degree was the Orange Bowl. Needed to find out whether it was going to be Nebraska or Oklahoma playing in the Orange Bowl. And so I think Orange Bowl officials were involved in that decision making as well. Again, it wasn't televised national. It wasn't a national telecast, but it was televised locally by Channel 10. Did televise the game, but it was through the night that they supposedly phone calls back and forth between Washington D.C. and the university officials and the Orange Bowl and so forth. as to whether they would play that game. Not very many games were played, but they wanted to get played to determine who would be the Orange Bowl representative.
And on the field, obviously, that's a huge game for us. It's a huge win for Devaney. Nebraska wins the Big 8. They go to the Orange Bowl. They play Auburn, and it's starting to now. Nebraska's starting to get some of that momentum going and some of that success. In '64, we go back down to Oklahoma. We lose to Oklahoma in '64, but in '65 we win it, and it creates Devaney's first undefeated season.
The Cornhuskers have wrapped up their first perfect season in 50 years. With 10 wins and no losses, Coach Bob Devaney's Nebraska record is now 38 wins and 5 losses. This is the third consecutive Big 8 title for Coach Bob Devaney. Coach Bob Devaney has had a shower. He is dripping wet. Coach, you're all wet. Do you enjoy this kind of a treatment after a ball game?
Well, anytime we can go 10-0, why, I'll take that shower with my clothes on very gratefully.
Of course, you've set a great tradition as a winning coach here, but this is the first time this has happened in the state of Nebraska in 50 years.
Well, Mark, it's the first all-winning season that I've ever had as a head coach also in college football.
So, Mike, I mean, they just said that they're the first time in 50 years for the program, first time for Devaney as a coach, an undefeated season. I get a little lost in these mid-60s. I think of the 69, 70, and 71 teams, but we were starting to really have a lot of success right here in this era too. Yeah,
he had success. Devaney was doing what people thought that, he could do when he came here. It looked like a great hire, except that they, playing Alabama in bowl games, it wasn't a good situation for the Huskers. Bear Bryant was kind of a frustration for the Huskers during that time.
There was a Devaney biography I watched that, and it was great. They were interviewing Devaney about the Alabama, and I think it must have been the next season because we played them back to back in the bowl game, and Bear Bryant calls him up and says, "Hey, Bob, we'd love to play you again. We had so much fun last year and everything. And it'd be so much fun to play you again." And Devaney goes, "They beat the shit out of us." and for NET to allow the S word to be played on it, because they didn't beep it out, or maybe they beeped it out, but still, it was the fact that we knew what Bob, the feisty Irishman there, he had to let that little one out there. And so I mean, 65, we win it. 66, we lose to Oklahoma there, and then the last time I talked to you, when we did Husker History 101, I kind of made a statement, and you called me on it right away. I go, then we had these down years of 67, 68, and you're like, they went 6-4. It wasn't terrible. And actually, something I really learned from you here, and I'm going to play this video over while we're talking. You had mentioned how this is 1967 against Oklahoma. You'd mentioned how 67, actually, we had like one of the top defenses in the country. I didn't realize that.
Number 1 ranked defense in the country.
Yeah, number 1. So it was just the off, and we were seeing some sacks here, and these are tackles in the backfield. So great defense. And actually, I mean, we couldn't put up more than 15 points in a game, it seemed like.
Yeah, Wayne Malin finished 9th in voting for the Heisman Trophy that year. He was the middle guard. It started his career as an offensive guard, and they moved him to middle guard, and he became an All-American. 67, Nebraska had a great defense, but had a problem with quarterbacks throwing interceptions. And Tom Osborne told me once that it was 67, 68. During that time is when he realized that a rushing yard was worth more than a passing yard, just because of the potential for interceptions and so forth.
And he started to become more involved on the offensive side during this time too.
Correct? Yeah, right. Exactly. There was actually a petition circulated in Omaha to get rid of Devaney because Bob always joked, his secretary handled all of his mail, and she went through it, and he said that she must have thrown away the letter about the petition being circulated in Omaha, because if he'd have known about that, he'd have signed it himself. But, there was frustration. 2 back-to-back 6-4 seasons, and people were frustrated with the program. And the only reason the petition was circulated was because the initial argument was you need to get rid of some assistant coaches. And Bob said, no, I'm not. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to get rid of any assistant coaches. And then the circulation of the petition to get rid of him, and didn't come to anything, obviously. And in '69, you get things turned around.
Think about that.
Turned around from 6-4, 6-4.
Yeah, think about that, Boomer. He was really guilty of not meeting the standards that he had created. He took over this program. He took over at nothing, and all of a sudden 6-4 wasn't acceptable anymore. After 5 years of that.
Well,
and you were playing
petitions, getting coaches fired. Apparently, that must have been there.
That was 65, 66, and 67. Those were all Thanksgiving Day games.
Oh,
people always remember the Oklahoma game as Thanksgiving Day. It was played 5 times on Thanksgiving: 65, 66, 67, 71, and 72. The rest of the time it was played on the Friday after. I think it was played 10 times on the Friday after.
And you mentioned that only like 3 times. It was normally the last game of the season, but on 3 different occasions, there was a game, a Big 8 game, a conference game that followed it.
Yeah. The 59 one was Halloween, and then the 78 game Missouri played Missouri after that, unfortunately.
We'll get to that one.
The 87 game played Colorado after that game.
So 68, as you mentioned earlier, we get blown out, and that's about the time that the petition's coming around. But around this time, we start making some changes with our recruiting, started going more into some JUCOs, getting some older guys. I know on the line we got some guys in there. Out west. And then obviously some of the young guys that you start hearing the names over the course of 69, 70, and 71. You start hearing about Taggy and Kinney and Rogers and all these guys. So Nebraska, in the true spirit of this series being a bunch of streaks, we start the streak of 69 to 71. And maybe let's focus on that right now. The 69 season doesn't get a lot of the discussion because obviously 70 and 71 are national championship years. But my mom, she went to the Sun Bowl in 69. So she's told me about that game and everything, beat Georgia pretty handily, but also we beat Oklahoma handily. What happened in 69, Mike? How did we start to get this thing flipped around to lead up to what we're going to see the following 2 years?
Well, you had Osborne. I think Tom was effectively the offensive coordinator at that point, although he didn't have that title. Bob never had anybody with that title. You didn't start that until Tom became the head coach. But Tom kind of became the offensive coordinator. He started meeting with the quarterbacks, which they hadn't done before. And they changed to a kind of a spread offense. That was part of the deal, part of what he needed to do. And then he was one of the guys that was primarily responsible for recruiting on the West Coast, where they got these junior college, Bob Newton most notably, but Bob Terrio ended up being a linebacker. Dick Rupert, Carl Johnson came from out west. I mean, they were getting these guys, Keith Wortman. They were getting offensive linemen. I think one of the things that sort of confused them was that when they played Alabama in these bowl games, Alabama had small, quick linemen. And Devaney kind of joked, that, hey, we followed Alabama. We got small linemen, but they weren't quick. And they changed their recruiting pattern. So with that, the change in the offense and the fact that they had somebody that was responsible for that, he was listed as the end coach, but he was meeting with the quarterbacks and he was basically coordinating the offense. That turned things around. And, by that point, I think it was the 69 bowl game. By then, Bob had told Tom that he wanted him to succeed as head coach. And his plan was to finish after the 71 season. That was Bob's original plan. And Tom thought that, he always said, following someone who's as successful as Bob had been was extremely difficult. And he looked into other coaching jobs, including the Texas Tech job, I believe. That year that they went down to the Sun Bowl, Tom went over to Texas Tech and interviewed for the job and didn't get it. Jim Carlin maybe got it. And Tom looked into a couple other jobs where he could coach. One of them was a coaching and teaching job at a smaller college, kind of thing. But that's what turned things around, was his direction, I think, and you know, the recruiting thing. You got to have the players, obviously, and Nebraska had a lot of talent.
Got a lot of talent. Well, that talent's now we're starting to transition in the 70s, and you know, here's the 1970 game.
27 yards needed for the touchdown. That could give them a victory if they went for 2 and made it. Threw it on the wing to the right. Jack Mildren, the quarterback. Here we go. 4th down play. Mildren drops back to pass. Mildren looks. He throws in the end zone. Tipped in the air. Intercepted by Anderson as the time runs out at the 10. And he runs out of bounds on the far side at the gun.
Boomer, victory.
Now, there was not good sportsmanship there on that play.
No, not at all.
He got hammered there.
That's a late hit. Speaking of hammered, these are diplomats that Boomer has made, and these are very good drinks here. Thank you very much.
Certainly, glad I can help.
So 1970, we obviously get now it's the first time Devaney has won consecutive games in a row at that point against Oklahoma, and through the wonderful bowl system that we have, in a series of Texas lost, and was it Ohio State? I mean, who were the teams that lost that set Nebraska up to when they played LSU? All of a sudden, that game was for the national championship.
Yeah, it was Ohio State lost and Texas lost in bowl games that day.
Mm-hmm.
And Nebraska knew then, I think, that if they could win the game, they had an opportunity to win a national championship. And I think, was it Notre Dame that had beat Texas?
Mm-hmm.
And Parsegian was like, oh, you know, we should be national champions. But it didn't happen that way.
And Texas was national champs in one of the 2 polls.
Right, because they didn't do a post-bowl poll.
Yeah, was that AP or is that UPI? Which one was
that? Was the UPI. That was the coaches poll.
Okay.
The Associated Press, the writers poll came after the bowl game. So Texas, which got upset in the Cotton Bowl by Notre Dame, and Ohio State got upset in the Rose Bowl by Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that opened the door for Nebraska. Nebraska knew about it. By the time kickoff came, Nebraska knew that it had an opportunity if it won that game.
We're going to talk in a little bit in the next segment. We're going to talk about what bowl games and motivation can do for a bowl game. But that, right there, I mean, that says a lot going into that LSU game, knowing that what we're playing for could be the national championship. No doubt I played a role. And Guy Ingles talked about who the little tiny middle guard that we had on the team in 70, that he was just going nuts on the bus. Poulier or something. I can't think of his last name. But it was like this little dude. He was like 5'11", but he played middle guard and was just like going crazy on the bus, you know, leading up to the
Eddie Perryard.
There you go.
He was.
I knew, Mike, you're going to fill in every gap of whatever I don't.
I remember some of these things. But Eddie Perryard was a tough guy, and he was about 5'9" or something, 5'10". Maybe he just was really short, but boy, he was tough, and they had a hard time dealing with him.
Well, you know, here we are. We've gotten through the 70 season. It was an undefeated year. We did tie USC, but won the national championship, first ever national championship that you know, we could claim so many from the Steam years. If we were,
but we'll get to that later.
If we were in Michigan, we would have 38 championships right now. We just claim all those.
The Steam years, 1915, they had an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl.
The
administration
didn't
said
spend
no.
the money.
Yeah. Plus, the faculty said, "Look, this would put too much emphasis on athletics. We can't be doing this." Which is the reason that they lost Jumbo Steam, because they wouldn't raise his salary, because the faculty and the administration said no football coach should make more than faculty members. Even though there were boosters
even offered to pay for it. Yeah. They wouldn't even have to come out of university funds. They were going to pony up the money.
The boosters were going to pay for it. Indiana had offered him $4,500, and he said he'd stay for $4,250. And the boosters raised the money. He was making $35,000, and the administration said, "No, can't do that. Can't happen."
And there's been a curse on the basketball program ever since.
Well, football, we've never won the Big Ten since.
That's true.
Go to
Indiana.
Indiana.
You know, the sad thing was that Steam had died of stomach cancer about 6 years later.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it wouldn't have been a long-term thing. But
Well, 1971. I mean, this is it. This is the game of the century. This will probably be its own little segment by itself here. But let's Boomer, you mentioned that the first game you went to, 1991. This is actually the first part of this video clip is that game. You can almost feel how cold it is coming through the video. But this was taken from the 20th. I got some update on my laptop. Get that out of the way. This is taken from the 1991 game, the 20th anniversary of it. Here's the game of the century.
Over the years, the Oklahoma-Nebraska Thanksgiving Showdown has produced many legendary games. But Devaney is almost always asked to talk about what has become known as a game of the century.
20 years ago, almost exactly to the day, it was on Thanksgiving, of course, in 1971. And here it is 20 years later, and if anything, the game has gotten bigger than it was at the time.
Yeah, and the players all get better, and the coaching gets better, and everything.
71, the game for number one. Unbeaten and untied Nebraska versus unbeaten and untied Oklahoma.
Well, Mike, we have this update that came on my laptop, and I am really hoping it does not restart my computer as during it. But anyways, the Oklahoma game here. Let's talk about the 1971 Oklahoma game. It's number one versus number two. All the lead up, everything that's going up to it. I mean, what was it like in 1971? What made that game, I guess, the game of the century?
In part, I would say the media and Sports Illustrated probably made it the game of the century. You define it in that way. I remember the cover of Sports Illustrated, the irresistible Oklahoma meets immovable Nebraska with Bob Terrio and Greg Pruitt on the cover. And, look at the conference, how dramatic at the end of the year, it was Nebraska number one, Oklahoma number two, Colorado number three in the eight. People think how strong the conference was then. The only games that Colorado lost were to Oklahoma and Nebraska. The only game Oklahoma lost was to Nebraska. The conference was strong, and it was the middle of the country, and it was a Thanksgiving Day game. Some of it is just generated by the circumstances. It didn't hurt that it was on Thanksgiving Day, right? You could call it the game of the century because everybody's watching. And, you've got the number one ranked team, number two ranked team has to be, you go back to Notre Dame and Michigan State, what year that was, where they played to a tie where Notre Dame didn't try to win it at the end and end up being a national champion.
Was that 68 or 69?
66 maybe.
Yeah, 60. That sounds right. They had Bubba Smith and
yeah.
But yeah, that Colorado team. Well, what gets lost in 71 is that the Iron Bowl between Auburn and Alabama was against two undefeated teams. That was the first time that Iron Bowl had been like that. So this is, as far as what's going on down there in the state of Alabama, that's as good as those programs are, up to that point. And Auburn goes on, loses handily to Alabama, and gets blown out in their bowl game by Oklahoma. Nebraska goes and plays an undefeated Alabama team, Bear Bryant, who thought that was one of his best teams, and just waxes the field with them. And that Colorado team lost by, I think it was, I'm sorry. Colorado beat LSU. The non-conference record or schedule for Colorado in 71 was like LSU and Ohio State, two top 10 teams. And Colorado beat LSU on the road by 10 points. Alabama beat that LSU team on the road by 7. So, to your point, that's how good the Big Eight was. Colorado was the third best team in the country, and really deservingly. I mean, that was probably a national championship caliber kind of team, except they were just in a buzzsaw of a conference with Oklahoma and Nebraska.
Yeah, it was really, there was no question. And, the Iron Bowl, I don't think Auburn was as established as Oklahoma. Alabama certainly was, but Oklahoma and Nebraska, both, you'd probably think of both of them before you'd think of Auburn at that point. And I think that probably had something to do with where that fell as well. But yeah, that the conference is what was the big factor, and I really feel like the fact that it was played on Thanksgiving Day, when it was in prime time, it just, that's what helped it, promote this as the game of the century. It's Sports Illustrated. Look what Sports Illustrated did, put it on the cover.
Yeah. Well, and here's the play that at least goes down as the play that really signifies it. And here's Johnny Rodgers.
Wiley in the kick. Wiley stands at his own 24, waits for the snap. Rodgers deep for Nebraska. Here's Wiley's kick. It's high. It holds up there. Rodgers takes the ball at the 30. He's hit and got away. Back upfield to the 35, to the 40. He's to the 45. He's to the 50, to the 45, to the 40, to the 35, to the 20, to the 10. He's all the way home. Woman and child did that. Put them in the aisles. Johnny the Jet Rodgers just tore them loose from their shoes.
Johnny the Jet Rodgers just tore him loose from the shoes. I mean, that is Lyle Bremser at his absolute best. That's an iconic play. And we talked about this before the show, Mike. What gets lost in this is that people think, I think sometimes people may think that was the game-winning play. That happened right away.
Yeah, that got Nebraska off to a good start anyway. Certainly.
And Rodgers definitely played a big role in the game because, as you mentioned too, his biggest contribution might have come, on that final drive.
Yeah. On the final drive, 12 plays, 74 yards, 5 minutes plus. Johnny, they got at the 46-yard line of Oklahoma, they've got 3rd down and 8. And Johnny breaks his route and cuts across the middle because of the way the Sooner defense was set up. And Taggy throws a pass. It's low. Johnny goes down and gets it, picks up the 1st down for 11 yards to the 35. And from there, Nebraska, I think Kenny had 13-yard carry after that. Johnny carried once, and then Kenny carried a couple, 3 times into the end zone for the play that we remember because that was the game-winning touchdown. But it was that 3rd down catch by Johnny. First of all, breaking his route, and second of all, going down and getting that ball. That really, I think that was the play of the game. Nebraska doesn't win the game if he doesn't make that play. I believe.
Yeah, Johnny said the same thing. I've seen him in interviews where he said that was the play.
But yeah, but the kickoff return, got Nebraska rolling, and you think about that Nebraska team. So you got Larry Jacobson, who won the Outland Trophy that year. You've got Rich Glover, who won the Outland Trophy and the Lombardi the next year. You got Johnny Rodgers, who won the Heisman Trophy the next year. The talent on that Nebraska team was remarkable and, irresistible Nebraska, immovable Nebraska, Oklahoma, that wishbone.
Yeah,
that was a thing.
Irresistible Oklahoma meets immovable Nebraska.
Yeah. And the best defense in the country, Nebraska, the best offense in the country, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. And that's something, Mike, obviously we're a Nebraska podcast, so we're going to obviously focus on the Nebraska side of this. But, that Oklahoma team, to talk about some of their players too. I mean, obviously they had Pruitt in the backfield and Mildren. Berhaney is an All-American center, and for Glover to go out and have 20-some tackles.
22 tackles, yeah.
22 tackles. And we are Columbus Scotus guys. And so both Boomer and I and Scotus, Joe Blaha and Bill Cush. And these guys are getting moved around. Cush is the fast guy, but they moved him to play corner where, hey, we just need to throw a fast guy over there because Blaha is going to play this monster back to defend this wishbone. That's the important thing. It's all about discipline and defending the wishbone. And Oklahoma, Mildren with John Harrison, they end up really hitting us hard with the pass in that game.
Yeah, well, that's how that's the thing, that you don't expect that from Oklahoma because of the way you run that wishbone T, they're still calling it, I guess, at that point, but they're running that wishbone offense, and you don't expect that kind of, because there were games where Oklahoma didn't throw the ball very much at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way that's going to cross you up. You prepare for it because it's something you really have to prepare for in order to stop that. And you have to be disciplined. You've got your man and you got to stay with him. And then they mix things up a little bit.
There was a story of Willie Harper. I think I read it it might have been the Devaney book actually that you helped co-write with Devaney and Friends. It might have been in that book. Oh, and by the way, also this is Nebraska, the Football Vault by Mike Babcock. We're just throwing out all kinds of, everything there. But
find retailers near you.
Yes, by all means. But anyways, there was one where Willie Harper, I think Devaney said he walked into it was the halftime of the game of the century, and one of the coaches had Harper up against a locker because one play he got so frustrated with Mildren cutting up and running, and Mildren had a lot of carries, but they did not want him pitching the ball to Pruitt. And one time he just lays out Mildren, but Mildren pitches it to Pruitt, and it's like Pruitt's one big carry of the first half. And that coach was going to make sure that Harper, to your point about having to be disciplined, he was going to make sure he knew not to do that again.
Yeah, but Willie Harper is another guy I should have mentioned. There's a guy that, and I think Bob Devaney said that, Harper was an Outland worthy guy if he hadn't been playing with guys that won it. That certainly would have been Willie that would have done it. So
All-American and heck of a
Adkins. They just had talent everywhere.
Well, the game is about to end and Nebraska's going to win it. Here we go. So the game of the century goes to Nebraska, 35-31. There's one more season. And just to give a little update here, hey, Rob, if you would come on to the air, I've got this laptop that is telling me it needs to reboot, and it's counting down to 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do here, Rob, if you get onto the stream, I am going to click update now, and we may or may not go off the screen. But if not, you guys stay on, chat for a couple minutes, and hopefully this reboots and we'll be back up. So
that's okay. We've got a few questions too.
Why don't you go through some questions? I'm going to click update now, and we may be going bye-bye.
Well, Mike, how are you tonight?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Oh, good. It's good to see you again. The last time that you did the interview with Honky, I listened, and that's pretty much all there was. I don't even think you knew I was there. So, I was busy making old fashions in the background. So, let's just, it may come up here, and I'm not sure where Honky wants me to go with this, but, there are some stuff with like modern era things. People are asking questions like, in the modern era, Colorado and Iowa seem to be like bigger rivalries. And what are your thoughts on that? Like when you're covering the team for that?
Well, I think when the Big 12 was established, it kind of became more Colorado just because Nebraska played Colorado every year for one thing. And if you want to find an unfriendly atmosphere, go out to Boulder, Colorado and watch Nebraska play sometime. I mean, it's brutal out there. I've been to a Nebraska-Colorado game where they had to take some of the student section and make them leave the stadium because they were so abusive, throwing things and whatever. So I think that's how the Colorado thing got started. And then when Nebraska gets into the Big Ten, no more Colorado, you got to have a rival. And I think that there's dislike from Iowa, even going back to when Nebraska just played Iowa as a non-conference, not very often. So I think it's by definition, a rivalry initially, and then you start playing and Nebraska's not having any success against the Hawkeyes, and it's the last, it's played the last conference game or whatever. I think those things kind of go together to help make it the rivalry. It's the same way with Colorado in terms of being the last game of the conference season.
I mean, I agree with you on that too, and I have a hard time even pointing out a true rival in the Big Ten since we've joined them myself, mostly because the lack of success we've had the last few years, and it's really hard to just pinpoint anyone because it feels like since Nebraska's joined the Big Ten, and maybe you can emphasize this a little bit more for me, but it seems like since Nebraska's joined the Big Ten, everybody has it out for us. Everybody hates us. Yeah. Everybody wants to beat us, right? So I mean, and it was almost like they call us their rival, and we're still like trying to figure out our identity in the conference, which I joke about it a lot, but I truly do believe this year is going to be the year that they figure that out, which also has another question involved with that. But what are your feelings on that whole thought of mine?
Well, I hope that Nebraska does get some things figured out and has an opportunity to beat the Hawkeyes in a situation where it means something at the end of the season. But my sense is, I've said this ad nauseum, I guess, you got to beat Northwestern in Dublin first, and then worry about what happens after that. You got to focus on that first game.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I agree with you 100%. I put it out today too with this whole thing with the press, right? That they're putting out where the assistants to the assistants aren't going to be able to talk to the assistants anymore or something like that. And I put it out and said, well, this is kind of the first year we're going to see it where Scott Frost is the CEO per se of this team now. And CEOs don't let mid-level management talk to the masses, right? He only lets his directors talk to him, right? Your OC, your DC. And so I'm fine with that. And I know that, it's like fans feel like they deserve more. Media feels like they're not going to be able to write their articles if they don't hear more. But the sports media, and this for a fact, has been writing articles about sports regardless of who they talk to for 100 years, and they'll be doing it for 100 years more. And the ones that are good at it will survive, and the ones that were bad at it will end up on ESPN. So, I mean, it's one of those things. And so I'm just kind of curious how you're feeling about that a little bit, and maybe how you think Frost is going to embrace that, especially because with the OU game lingering there, let's say they beat Northwestern, they win the next two games, they play Oklahoma and they win that game. What kind of effect do you think that that's going to have on the overall program? Because there's a question about that here too from Kurt. And so I'm just asking it for Kurt in my own Rob way.
If they do, I mean, if they go on a run, they beat Northwestern and then they beat North Dakota. Is it North Dakota or North Dakota State?
North Dakota,
not the good Dakota.
Not the good Dakota, and then Georgia Southern.
and Georgia Southern or whatever, and then beat Oklahoma. Yeah, the expectations are going to skyrocket because then the next game is a home game against Indiana, I think. And then you got to go to Rutgers for that Friday night thing that, but you could win that. If you've got some momentum, you could win that. And then it's at Purdue, you could win that. And then you got Illinois and Minnesota at home. I mean, the schedule sets up well if you can build some momentum. And I don't even think you have to beat Oklahoma in order to generate that momentum. But if you play well against Oklahoma and you win those other games, I think their expectations are going to jump.
You're 100% right, Mike. I mean, that Northwestern game, you come back 1-0, you're not even leaving the state of Nebraska again until October, and everything that has plagued us with schedules in the past. Where last year, we're playing everybody, Michigan State, Ohio State. Things have flipped this year, and so that really does help. But good news. We clicked the button. It didn't look like we went into the abyss or anything. So I think we made it through. We made it through it. So we just finished off with basically the end of the Devaney era. So I think it's a good time now to start up and get into the Osborne era here. So
do you want to kick me off again, Honky? I
go for it, Rob.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna leave, and thank you so much for having me on tonight. And if for some reason you guys get kicked off, I'll be back. And thank you, Redcasters. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Go
Rob.
Big Red.
All right, let me find it. And so here we go. That's Devaney. So here we go. It's the Osborne era, 1973 to 1997. 25 seasons, and yet Boomer, correct me on my math there, 13 and 13 does not add up to 25. So
no, it does not. Yeah.
So something happened, I think, that we'll get to that would lead to that being an uneven number there. But to go through what these years were, again, it's all about streaks. It starts off here with Barry Switzer in Oklahoma, which, by the way, Barry Switzer and Osborne took over the same season, 1973. Switzer has early success. Then there's the little streak in the early 80s, back to some success of Oklahoma, and then Osborne finishes strong. So let's start with you, Mike, here. Kind of walk us in. It's 1973. Devaney has just left. They did lose the last game of the Devaney Era in 72, so now we're starting with Osborne. And obviously Oklahoma's starting fresh with Switzer too. What's kind of going on with the programs, and how is the series? What's happening in 1973?
Well, 1973, I'm sure that there's optimism still because Nebraska, you know, 2 of the previous 3 years they got national championships, and Tom is the handpicked successor, and Bob's the athletic director, and you know things are looking good there. From that standpoint, you know, Bob got what he wanted in terms of who was going to follow him. Barry Switzer comes in, Tom and Barry come in at the same time, and then 5 consecutive losses, and frustration is to the point where Tom, you know, in 1978, Tom goes to Colorado, applies for the job at Colorado, gets to the point where he actually goes and has a talk with the players at Colorado, and then decides that he says, you know, I decided that I couldn't coach against players that I had recruited at Nebraska and whatever. So he doesn't go. But I mean, think about that. Every year, Tom's teams always won at least 9 games and went to a bowl game. And people are frustrated because they can't beat Oklahoma. It's like it's a 1-game season.
Yeah. Well, that was on that.
Oklahoma.
That was on that audio of the opening clip of the show tonight. Was Osborne before the 78 game saying that's the one game, you know, that people defined your season, because to your point, we're winning. I think he said, you know, about a 77% clip, you know, in those first 3, 4, 5 seasons. And there was a point in a bowl game where we had beaten Texas Tech, I think, in the Bluebonnet Bowl. And if we hadn't, some Regent came up to him and said he'd been fired.
Was there a petition?
Regent said it's a good thing you won that game. You know, it's like, what? You know, he has a success, but he doesn't beat Oklahoma, and it's like, that's it. You know, you beat Oklahoma, or you know, we're not happy, we're upset about it, and then he beats, you know, his 78 team beats Oklahoma, and then they got to play him in a bowl game again, and they lose again.
Well, that gets to be that odd number. Well, as we're getting through those mid 70s here, here's a graphic, Sooner Magic. 1976. What does Sooner Magic mean? Let's watch a clip here on Sooner Magic.
Here we go.
3.5 minutes to play. The Sooners took over on its own 16-yard line. Offensive coordinator Galen Hall up in the press box planned the final strategy with head coach Barry Switzer.
With the time left in the game, we thought we could move the ball. We had 85 yards to go, so we had to have a big play of some type. And the first play that came to mind was the halfback pass, which we have had in all year. And so we put Woody Shepard in the game because he throws the best. He hit Steve Rhodes, and we got the big play we needed to get us out of the hole. At that time, we felt there's still enough time left in the clock that we could go on the ground. We pick up a first down. Time's running out. We get thrown for the 2 losses. And then on the stop and lateral, Dean Blevins did a good job with it. Elvis ran by, got the lateral from Steve Rhodes, and it was executed maybe better than we do in practice.
Steve Rhodes, the freshman from Dallas, Texas, who made the big catch and lateral play work.
Mike.
That's not Oklahoma football. They run the wishbone.
Well, that was 76, and from what my research was, that was the birth of Sooner Magic, but it would continue on. And to your point, those first 5 years were rough for Osborne, not because he was losing a bunch of games. He wasn't. It was just that one game. And then it's 78, and let's start to talk about that 78 game here. Nebraska loses at the beginning of the season to Alabama. In fact, well, actually, this is a marquee year in Husker history because a certain sports writer for the Lincoln Journal is brought on board in 1978 as well. So this is your first season covering the Huskers, right?
Yeah, right.
And
that, that Alabama game was Tom Surley wore EJ Jr. like a shirt. I mean, Junior was there just all over the place, and but Nebraska recovered, and that was the thing, that they had the great effort. Barry Switzer, in his book Bootlegger's Boy, says that he thinks that he thought the 74 team was the best team that he had coached, but as he thought back about it, he thought maybe the 78 team was the best team that he coached.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that. We saw that. I guess when they beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, when it turns around and they beat them there. But number 1, Oklahoma loses to number 4 Nebraska. And that was the one deficiency of the wishbone, was the potential to fumble. And that day, 9 fumbles, 6 of which were lost. And I'll never forget that. I've got a picture up on my wall back. You can't see it, but of the play where Jim Pillen recovers a fumble, and it's forced by I think Jeff Hansen and Andy Means. 3 minutes and 27 seconds left. Billy Sims had a 27-yard run or whatever.
Great run,
fumbles
too.
the ball at the 3, and Nebraska recovers.
Yeah, Switzer said that in one of the videos where, gosh, we fumbled 9 times and everything and lost 6. Well, they should have lost 1 more, including this one.
They're going to say that Oklahoma's player hit the ground before he lost the ball. Apparently, that's what they're saying. And Nebraska's recovery of the fumble back at the 10 is not going to stand. The officials are saying they blew the ball dead. And Tom Osborne is really hot on the far side. He's coming out to talk to an official. Now they're sending him back. And this crowd is really wild. I'll tell you, that was an unbelievable thing.
John Rood and Kelly Phelps.
And Osborne is really mad. And you think about the pressure he's under right there. He's lost 5 straight, and I mean, clear as day, that's a fumble, right?
Yeah.
And what a terrible gaffe of a call. And Osborne's upset. The fans, you heard the crowd there over the audio. They're frustrated. I mean, nobody wants to lose to Oklahoma for a 6th straight time. And to get that final play that Jim Pillen lands on the fumble, they get the victory. I want to play this audio for you, and this is Jerry Moore post game and a little bit of Kent Pavelka, but just the elation that the coach had for Tom to get the win.
As everybody knows, he's just super, and I just want to repeat what you guys have already said. We're happy for our players and all the coaches and the people in Nebraska, but Tom, as much as anything, for Coach Osborne, this is a super, super win for him.
Yeah, I guess so. 17-14, Nebraska beats Oklahoma, and I really am at a complete loss of what to ask for the first time in my life. What can you say about the monumental game that this was, what this means, what this win means to your program?
What this win means to the program, and I completely understand what Pavelka's saying at that moment. I mean, now you're going to turn around next week. You're going to beat that Missouri team. You're going to go on to bowl game. What's this going to lead to? And unfortunately, as you had said earlier, Mike, the frustration was that it didn't lead to something. The next week, in one of the only 3 seasons where we aren't finishing the season with Oklahoma, we have Missouri come in, and for the 3rd straight time in Lincoln, Missouri came out with a victory.
35-31, right?
Mm-hmm.
Game of the century.
Game of the century. And we talked about the motivation to play in a bowl game earlier, right? When you have the motivation, you can do great things. Well, it was a real kick in the gut for Osborne and our team to have to go and play Oklahoma again. But this is how Oklahoma took the reaction from Switzer in the locker room.
All right, now what has happened is that with Georgia getting beat, the Tide is like getting beat, so that puts Alabama. Penn State more than likely is going to go to the Sugar Bowl to play Alabama. Now what it does to us, it does this. The Orange Bowl is meeting right now in an executive meeting. they're considering, I don't know, the possibility of taking us, or probably more likely ask us to come play Nebraska again in Orange Bowl.
I think OU wanted to play Nebraska in the Orange Bowl there.
Yeah, that was not the right thing to do. Whatever. I didn't, at that point, it may have happened before, but I'd never seen that before, where you had a rematch in a bowl game.
Yeah, especially in that era. Yeah.
Just garbage. But a shared colleague of ours, Carl Vogel, but I work with him now, but you used to work with Carl. He went to the 78 Orange Bowl. So he has fond memories of walking around the neighborhood right around the Orange Bowl Stadium. I guess that was I guess it was a little sketchy at times back then. But anyways, that led to a lot of the frustration you're talking about after that offseason. Coach Osborne, for the only time really that publicly at least, entertained leaving Nebraska. And it was just, am I ever going to be able to do enough? And, the things that were starting to beat Nebraska, or the things that were beating Nebraska against Oklahoma, the mobile quarterback, the Thomas Lotts, the J.C. Watts, Nebraska was, playing a passing attack, the Ferragamos, Hums, that style. And Osborne started to look at respectively at himself, at his program, and says, we need to have quarterbacks that can do things with their legs the way that Oklahoma quarterbacks can. And Osborne would go head to head against Switzer down in Fort Worth for the services of Turner Gill. And we start to see the change, the switch in the offense. We go into the triple option. We get to, those early 80s where we start to have our own little winning streak, 81, 82, 83. Let's start to focus on that era, the early 80s.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that Tom was not inflexible. He made changes when they needed to be made, and that was one of the things that he looked at and said, we need to have a quarterback that can run. If you're going to be successful, in oversimplified terms, if you're going to be successful in the Big 8, you've got to play the way Oklahoma plays, because Oklahoma is the one that dominates the conference. Mm-hmm. And so the first quarterback that Tom recruited, I think, that fit that mold was Jeff Quinn out of Ord, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And then he got Nate Mason from Greenville, Texas. Nate Mason and Ricky Simmons came up here. Then he got Turner Gill, and there was a big competition with Oklahoma, although Turner, I think, sensed that Oklahoma wanted him as a defensive back, not as quarterback. But, that's how it evolved. That Turner Gill could run. He could have been a pro passer if that's what you wanted him to do. He was just a really talented guy. Well, and then you add to it great offensive lines, with Dave Remington anchoring the line, and you had Dean Steinkuhler on the line, and you had
Trent Woods.
And of course, Mike Rozier and Roger Craig and Irving Fryer. Yep, I got that poster still. The scoring explosion they were.
That 82 season, my first memories from start to finish of a season is 1983. I mean, I remember the kickoff classic 44-6 against Penn State, and I haven't forgot a game since. But I didn't recognize, I was just too young. I was 5 in 82, so I didn't quite catch on to what that season was about. But the offensive talent on that 82 team, because you have the scoring explosion, but you still have Remington, you still have Roger Craig, you also have Jamie Williams, tight end. I mean, that is an amazing, group of talent there. And of course, these are keeping it with the Oklahoma talk. These are years that we're beating Oklahoma. Now, was Oklahoma down at this time, during the early 80s, or was Nebraska just that good? I know they had Marcus Dupree and,
Yeah. It wasn't the 81 game, Turner couldn't play because he got the leg injury in the Iowa State game, the previous game. And so Mark Maurer stepped in, and Nebraska won that game 37-14 down in Norman. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was a great Oklahoma team, but it was a scrap in 82 and it was a scrap in 83 with Oklahoma. And I don't remember if the Sooners were ranked during that time. There was a little bit of a downswing there. Then they came back up, and then there was really a slide for Oklahoma. when Switzer left, and then they started changing coaches and so that affected them there. But it was, the frustration of having to play him again in that bowl game, didn't impact the recruiting, obviously, because Nebraska recruited really well and was aggressive from that standpoint. Again, even though the coach had, considered going to Colorado.
Had concern.
And like Devaney before him, Tom had kind of surveyed his staff and said, "Hey, should we look into this?" And they all said, "Yeah, and let's give it a shot." So, I mean, he was loyal to the people that were loyal to him, but recruiting was really, Frank did a good job in New Jersey. They got Rozier. He spent 1 year in community college, Coffeyville Community College, came up to Nebraska. Then you got in '82, like you said, you've got Roger Craig and Mike Rozier, and you've got a Roger Craig who says, "I'll try fullback." If that can get us both on the field, and then he kind of got banged up and moved back to I-back. But tremendous talent there. That scoring explosion. Those three guys are recognized at it, but again, that offensive line was really an important part of it, and you had the fullback that was an important part of it, and Nebraska had an outstanding team, 81, 82, 83 through that stretch.
And really running that triple option, something that started with Osborne, I think, trying to bring more of an Oklahoma style of offense, getting
exactly. That was you had Turner Gill, and then you had Steve Taylor, and you got those quarterbacks that could do both, that could run and could pass, and that was important to where that program was going to go and win those national championships.
Now, Mike, we're getting out of the 81 to 83 era. Now we're going to move into the 84. And I hate to jump around here, but I forgot one video, and I have to show you the video. This is 1980, and if you could give us a little bit of context after this. Switzer shows up on the Bob Devaney show on a Friday night. Surprises Dick Janda. I want to show this for the Redcasters, but if you can give a little context after this.
Here we go.
And I would go over and talk to Dick Jana, who does the show. I've known for years that does Tom Osborne's show and Bob's show out of Lincoln. And I said, "Dick, let me do this. Let me hide behind the stage. And Bob comes on. I want to walk up and give him a sack of tacos."
We hope to give it to Barry Switzer. In case Barry didn't get to go to the Orange Bowl, he could eat the pineapple instead of the tamales that they served down there in El Paso.
Well, Ray,
really, that was the thing.
Thanks very much for being here. I guess we pulled out all. Whoa, wait a minute here. I guess he's
Bob?
in person here.
Goddamn Barry.
Hey, I appreciate the pineapple, but I've got a couple of tacos for you, Bob.
Oh, God. Hey, one of the greatest coaches in the country, and it's great to be here with us here.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
I want to tell you
And I'll
something.
tell you, wherever we go, we're well fed.
I mean, the question we had earlier, that shows a little bit about the relationship between Oklahoma and Nebraska, that Barry could do that, and that Bob would take it in, that Bob would do what he did, and then they would both take it in the way that they did. Nebraska ended up going to the Sun Bowl.
And Bob and Barry are more alike than Bob and Tom were.
Yeah. No question about that. Very much so. And that was part of it. Yeah,
well,
it was a good relationship that they had.
Well, my first year, like I said, I remember 83. We beat Oklahoma, but then what I remember is that the next 4 years really were tough. Those were formative years for me, and it was losing Oklahoma at the end of each of those seasons. Some of the Sooner magic being involved. But I want to show something first. And Boomer, I think you can talk a little bit about this. It doesn't have anything to do with Nebraska and Oklahoma, but it has to do with the college football landscape today. There was a lawsuit that Oklahoma had against the NCAA in 1984, had to deal some with television, correct, Boomer?
Correct,
and started to lead to maybe some of the stuff that we're starting to see now with USC and UCLA and conference expansion. Can you talk a little there?
Yeah, basically the way college football was kind of broadcast back then is the NCAA basically controlled the rights of who could be seen and when, and they would limit schools' appearances. I think they were limited to like 6 appearances on TV a year, any particular school. and only 4 of those could be national broadcasts, and they had to, the broadcast stations had to put like 82 or 84 different schools on during the year at some point. So you were really limited to where it was. And I think Barry Switzer got really annoyed. I think it was 81. They were playing USC. It was I would think a 1 versus 2 matchup. And there were several stations that carried the Citadel versus Appalachian State rather than, playing Oklahoma USC. And that kind of, teased everybody, with what they had. And, one thing led to another, and it kept going through lawsuits. And eventually went to the Supreme Court. And I think it was a 7-2 decision where the Supreme Court basically kind of blew up that old model of how, of who controlled television rights for football. And this kind of opened the floodgates to schools controlling media rights, conferences taking over. And it really kind of led to what we see today with, that led to the death of a lot of the independent schools. Your Penn States and Miamis and Florida States felt the pressure to join conferences. And
then conferences like the Southwest and the Big
Southwest
Eight.
And the Big Eight couldn't really compete. This is where Notre Dame was able to start getting their own big deal, which kind of, set the stage for all of this. And really, if you want to go back to what changed football, it took a while to kind of, percolate through. You had to get cable up and running, and now streaming and the huge media rights deals. But that's kind of where it all begins with Oklahoma in '84. So with that court decision.
Yeah, TV exposure was really important. I mean, it helped Nebraska.
Sure.
Walked on here from Chapin, South Carolina, said he had watched Nebraska on TV. That's where he got, that's a long way to come, but they had that kind of exposure. And that was before this, and then this just opened it up.
Well, Mike, 84 to 86, when you see this guy's face, I mean, what does this make you think?
The Boz.
The Boz.
It makes me think of we used to have the Big 8 Skyriders tour. And you would take a bus to places like Kansas and Kansas State or whatever, but it would all start in Kansas City and it would finish in Oklahoma, I think. And you'd take flights to various places. And I remember the Skyriders stop in Norman, Oklahoma when I think he was a sophomore, maybe he was a junior. Anyway, Brian Bosworth was one of the players that we had available to us, and he came out. He had a button-down collar shirt. I mean, he just looked like a preppy, like a collegiate preppy. But he started talking, and the one thing I remember him saying was he hated orange and he hated Texas. And he was from Texas, but he was at Oklahoma. So that kind of tells you where that Texas-Oklahoma thing was. But yeah, the Boz. That's how I first remember him, with his button-down collar shirt. He didn't look anything like that.
Well, we lose all 3 of those games: 84, 85, 86, and 87. 87. We talk about the game of the century one, 1971. Well, I remember this. I remember my mom. I think she must have got it at Hinky Dinky in Columbus, but the Husker hanky, and I had that hanging in my room, and it was Nebraska, Oklahoma, November 21st, 1987. And that was a big game, number 1 versus number 2 again, Nebraska at home. And this is the year, Mike, we're going to beat these guys and that streak. That's going to be I was going to be a very happy kid, and it didn't happen again.
Yeah, and the curious thing was that the week before, Oklahoma was 1 and Nebraska was 2, and they flip-flopped before the game. And, the week before the game, they flip-flopped in the rankings so that Nebraska was number 1 and Oklahoma was number 2. And I don't know whether the people that voted just said, hey, we're going to have a game of the century 2. It's got to be Nebraska's got to be number 1 because it's in Lincoln or whatever, or, however you want to put it together. It just seemed strange that they would do it that way. But the final score, it wasn't that close. I mean, it was pretty one-sided. Oklahoma dominated that game.
Well, and that takes us to 1988, and it's a significant game because Osborne, we win, and it was a ice bowl down in Norman. Nebraska wins 7-3, I believe. But it's the last game, the final game of the Switzer era. And as you mentioned earlier, Switzer ends his career against Nebraska 5-12. So Osborne, to think about, what's going to happen here for him to finish his career against Oklahoma 13-13, at the end of 1988, Osborne's sitting at 5-12. He has a lot of ground to make up, but they win that final game. And now Oklahoma they're, Switzer didn't just leave on his own. There was
No.
some help pushing him out, and you start to get in some probations. In Oklahoma now starts to feel the hurt from that, getting into the Gary Gibbs era and all that. And Osborne, obviously, we know what Nebraska did in the 90s, but that was really an end of an era, 1988. Switzer's done.
Yeah, that things went downhill essentially for Oklahoma after that. The only win that Oklahoma had against Nebraska the rest of Tom's tenure was the one where they ran Mickey Joseph into that bench and got the laceration of his leg, and that was not exactly a cordial situation.
No, that stadium down there in Norman, you were right on the field. I mean, there's no sideline space or anything. I can remember that push, and it was just like, oh no. And that was a rough end of that year. But we get into the 90s. I mean, now this is just fun talk I didn't even have any graphics or videos of this. This is just fun chat now. It's 90s, and it's just going to be win after win after win. Boomer, 91. You mentioned that. We win that, go to the Orange Bowl there. Johnny Mitchell I remember him having, some catches in there, and it was just
Calvin Jones had a big touchdown at the end to win it,
which he technically dropped before he got into the end zone. But we're not going to even
no replay.
No replay. In fact, strike that. Redcasters didn't even say that. Mike,
we will take replay of Penn State in '82.
Absolutely, we absolutely will. Well, Mike, tell us what was it like to be covering the Huskers there in the early '90s? What's it like when we start to transition? We had Damon Benning on back in April, and I asked him about, he got there in '92, and then his last game was in '96, so he got to be there as part of the transition where, we were doing again, kind of like the Devaney era where we're still going 6-4. We weren't terrible in 89, 90, 91. We're winning 9 games or whatever, but we're just but there's a shift. Something happened around the early 90s. What was it like to be covering that, to see that shift, and what was going on that you saw where Nebraska went from being a good 9-10 win team to all of a sudden, boom, what we saw?
Well, I think it had to do with recruiting. And here's another thing that really made an impact was, I said Tom wasn't set in his ways. He was willing to make changes as he did with the offense, and they went from a 50 front to a 4-3 defense because he thought they needed to get more speed in the defense, and they needed to be more aggressive on defense because they were having problems with playing in these bowl games against teams that threw the ball. And so he adjusted. You brought Ed Stewart in. He was a safety, and they made him a linebacker, and he becomes an All-American linebacker. They made those adjustments. It was Tom's ability to adjust that enabled the Huskers to win 3 national championships in his final 4 seasons. And really, as you look back through Tom's time, there weren't too many seasons where at some point during that season, Nebraska wasn't in a position to win the national championship. The Clemson Bowl game after the 81 season or whatever, Nebraska could have been national champs that year. Just almost every year, Nebraska had an opportunity at some point. The Penn State thing, if that play hadn't gone the way it did, Nebraska won that game, probably would have played for a national championship, could have won a national championship that year. And it finally started to fall into place in the 90s. And I think I remember the 94 Orange Bowl, standing outside the stadium waiting for the shuttle to take the media back to the hotel. It was probably 2:00 in the morning or whatever. We'd written the stories or whatever. And I thought, I've got to approach this job as if every game will be my last. I've got to appreciate every game. Maybe something that I'd kind of done, I think. Because when I first started covering the games, it's like, wow, I'm sitting on the 50-yard line in the press box. I'm going to all the games. This is great. But it quickly became the people that I was dealing with, the coaches, the players, the administrators, the fans. That's what kept me going. And that's why I've done what I've done for as long as I've done it. It's the people. It's not, the games are kind of secondary to me. But it was that night I thought, treat every game as if it's going to be your last, because you never know when you're going to quit doing this or when you're not going to be able to do it, and appreciate it for that. And I think I did that, but it just came into focus for me at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, things just came together for the program in those 90s, and 60-3 over the last 5 years, 4 undefeated regular seasons, 3 undefeated seasons, 4 national championship games, 3 of them won. But it's this 25 years of Osborne. And I think some people think it's this straight trajectory all the way up, from the start to the end. And it's this constant up and down. It's the Oklahoma. They're running it on us, and now we need to switch up, get Turner Gill to match with what they're doing. As you mentioned, 10 years later, when people are saying we need to throw the ball like Florida State and Miami, Osborne saying we need to play defense like Florida State, Miami. And again, he's adjusting, and the pinnacle is those last 5 years, and we were good throughout, but it wasn't just this straight trajectory. There was all for the young Redcasters that if you look romantically on it, like it was just 25 glorious years and, we were happy dory all the time. No, we weren't. It was, Osborne was constantly under pressure. You lose to Oklahoma early, you can't win the big game. You lose 7 straight bowl games. You run the ball too much. How about that for run the damn ball guy? We ran the ball too much back then. We'd love to have that back again.
255, 49, and 3, and you look at it and say, well, yeah, it was just right up the line to those national championships. No, it wasn't. You're exactly right. It was a roller coaster ride for Tom. Mm-hmm. And you look at it, the evidence wouldn't support that. Every season, at least 9 wins and a bowl game every season. And like I said, the majority of those seasons, you could look at some point in the season and say Nebraska could be in contention for the national title, because that's how good Tom's teams were.
Every year. The 80s, we were the team of the 80s, I think, never won a national title in the 80s, but had won the most games in the team of the 80s there. We're not talking as much about Oklahoma right now in the 90s because the Oklahoma was going through a down period. And Nebraska, so we beat them. Now, some of them were still close games, 83 or 93 and 94. There were close games. By 95, the last game of the Big 8, Nebraska is at 37-0, shutout. That's what ends the Big 8 conference, the last game of that conference. And although we would go on to play them the next 2 years, 96 and 97, we're now entering into the Big 12 era. Oklahoma, in some ways, I don't blame them here. They had an opportunity, I'm sure, in the South Division. They could have had a crossover game and played us every year. I'm sure if they wanted to agree to it. Why would you agree to that if you're Oklahoma? Why would you be the only team in the South to play at that time, this team that's a juggernaut? We'll play them every year. Oh, and we'll play A&M and Texas and Oklahoma State. And those teams won't have to play Nebraska every year. I get it. But it ended, essentially, it was going to end the ongoing rivalry. We play them 2 more times. I was at that game in 96 in Norman. So up until last year, because I went to the game last year in Norman, but I've been to 2 games in Norman. I saw us blow them out in 96, and I saw us down 35-0 at the end of the first quarter in 2008. Love that stadium. I absolutely love Norman. It's a great place to go and watch a game. But I watched 2 blowouts until last season was a good game. But we blow them out in 96, and Osborne in 97 gets his 250th victory on a 69-7. I mean, it was just, for Oklahoma, it was kind of a sad way to see that part of the era, end, because they were not good there in the mid-90s.
Yeah, and Tom made some comments about that. That he felt badly that the games got out of hand and that Oklahoma had sort of dropped to where it did. I think he was sincere in that.
Well, I just want to ask, maybe we can have a little discussion here. Here's the Sports Illustrated there, and it's kind of the end of the era. I mean, I guess I want to get both your thoughts. I'll start with you, Boomer. You're from Texas, but you guys have both mentioned this multiple times here. Oklahoma and Texas have a rivalry with each other, a hatred, of border war. Oklahoma, for what it's worth, also has their in-state one with Oklahoma State with Bedlam. But when it came down to picking your rival or whatever, it's pretty clear in the 90s. Oklahoma made that decision, right, Boomer?
Yeah, and it's for all the reasons you both mentioned. Like Mike said, it's the hatred is there, and that's part of what makes a fun rivalry to a large degree is hatred. I mean, we had a different scenario with Oklahoma. And then just when it comes down to, like you'd said, who are you going to play every season? Oklahoma wants that connection with Texas on a regular basis just for recruiting and everything else their plan is. And the way the Big 12 was being set up, maybe in retrospect they could have done something different.
Yeah,
East-West
or something.
East-West sort of thing. So it's not so much the old Southwest versus the old Big 8. They could have divided it up something different. But I can't blame Oklahoma for doing what they did. It made the most sense at the time and with the structure of the conference and the way it was going to be. And it actually kind of did work out for them the way it looks. Yeah, they made the right decision.
Well, if you think about 1995, the last year of the Big 8, we had 4 teams in the top 10, and all 4 of them were from what was going to be the Big 12 North. Kansas, K-State, and Colorado and Nebraska all finished in the top 10. I mean, that was the dominating side at that freeze frame picture in time. Mike, what are your thoughts in 95 and 96, the Big 12 starting to come into existence? What are your thoughts as this rivalry was going to – it didn't end, but it was going to end on an annual basis after the 97 season?
Yeah, well, for me personally, it was disappointment because, again, my favorite game that I've ever been at was the 78 Oklahoma-Nebraska game. And not counting bowl games, my favorite place to visit for road games was always Norman, Oklahoma, because of that connection that I had with, growing up with Nebraska, Oklahoma, kind of a thing. So I was disappointed from that standpoint, but as Boomer said, it made sense. I mean, there wasn't any way you were going to define it you weren't going to put those teams in the same division. It wasn't going to work. There wasn't any way you could break things down so that it would work, that it would make any kind of sense. Nowadays, you could have done it because nothing makes any sense. You do what you want to do.
At one point, the Big 12 had 10 teams and the Big 10 had 12.
Yeah.
Who cares?
But, in that situation, the way it was then, the way times were, it just made sense that had to be. My first thought was, I don't think Nebraska even needs to go to the Big 12. It needs to stay the Big 8. That is always my feeling. But realistically, that was not a good idea because you have all of a sudden when Nebraska left the Big 12, I thought shouldn't have done that either. But you look at it, it's like, well, Missouri would have taken that place if Nebraska hadn't gone to the Big 10. Missouri leaves, Colorado leaves, the old Big 8 is all fractured, so it fell apart anyway.
Well, I think those Husker fans that were frustrated 2 years ago in COVID and saying we should go back to the Big 12, I'm glad those people didn't get their way.
Right. The one thing that frustrated me more than anything was that I remember someone saying, it's just the addition of these 4 teams from Texas. It's not going to change. They're just joining the Big 8. And immediately the conference headquarters goes from Kansas City down to Texas. And it's obvious that Texas comes in and starts running the conference.
Yep. A bunch of 1 to 11 votes. Yep. A bunch of 1 to 11 votes. And we were on the.
See that. Yeah. Nebraska, even the old, the Big 8 schools never sided with Nebraska.
Prop 48. Yeah. Prop 48 went away and Nebraska was the one of that. It was just.
Why was that? It was because Nebraska had dominated. That's why.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We're going to get even with them now. We're going to vote against that. I mean, there was an element of that. We're going to vote against them. Whatever they want, we're against it.
Well, I think we've covered the Osborne era really well there. I like that. Let's move on. And this takes us into the modern era, 1998 to now. 1998, obviously, that's the first year of Frank Solich taking over. It's also the first time you're going to start to see gaps here where we aren't playing games. And so we don't play in 98 or 99. Then we go back and forth, 2000, 2001, another gap. And then there's some games in here, and then the long gap here until last season where we aren't in the same conference anymore. So truly the modern era is a new era with Oklahoma. Mike, let's start to talk about that. Oklahoma hires Bob Stoops in 1999. And as we mentioned earlier, I mean, it was a bad decade for them from, basically, Switzer leaves in 88 up until 99. That was a rough stretch for Oklahoma. And Stoops comes in and pretty much, first year, I think went like 7-5 or something like that. But by the second year, they're winning the national title, which is just insane. Some good talent, obviously, that John Blake left him. but also they went out into the transfer or into the JUCOs and brought in Marshall and I think Heupel. They came in there, so they brought in some of the guys too to make that 2000 team work. But what are your memories there? Let's focus on the 2000 and 2001 era of this series.
Okay, because I was going to say there are two things in the era that we're talking about, two things that come to mind for me. One is the 2001 game, which I consider kind of the beginning of the end for Nebraska, of consistently being in the national conversation. Nebraska, black 41 flash reverse pass.
Here, I'm going to play it.
So now here are the Huskers at the 36-yard line. First down and 10 to go. Here's a handoff to Thunder, who gives it back to Mike Stuntz. He's going to throw it. He's got a man out there at the 40. It is Eric Crouch. 15, 10, 5, touchdown! Yes!
It's good when you can't even hear what the announcers are saying anymore because they're just screaming.
Yeah, and Oklahoma had run that play earlier in the game.
Yeah, they did.
Work out well.
And were you in the press box during that play then?
Yeah.
So I mean, I know there's decorum and you're not supposed. There's no. I mean, are people making noise?
I don't know. I don't. I mean, I've really, I don't wear red very much, and I don't. Like I said, it's to some degree. It's the games are, sort of dressing. It's the people that have kept me involved in this stuff. That's what I'm interested in.
You're more disciplined than I am.
That was quite the play. Which made sense. Stuntz was a quarterback. He was recruited as a quarterback, and he was playing split end. He could do that, and we didn't even talk about in '79 when Nebraska first ran the fumble-rooski, ran it twice, and Randy Schleusner scored a touchdown, and John Habakost picked up a first down, I think, on that running the Bumrooski against Oklahoma in the Oklahoma game. They lost that game, so but that black 41 flash reverse pass was what I remember about this era, and probably. And then the 2004 game, which whenever you want to talk about that's the other one I remember.
Yeah. Well, one thing about the 2000 game, because that was a big win for Oklahoma to get against us. That really gave them the momentum.
I was at that game.
Oh, you were.
Oh yeah. It started so
was
well.
Number one, right? 1 versus 3.
Yeah, and
we started off 14-0, and everything was going great. And
Nebraska couldn't do anything wrong going up to 14-0. I remember Davison had a long catch, and then I think they kicked us down to our end zone. And we did like a fullback dive to Willie Miller, and he went for like 60 yards. It was just like everything was working. And then just on a flip of a switch,
I don't know what happened.
Oklahoma just went
31-14, was it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't score again.
Nope.
But so, yeah, you're right. We split those 2 games. Then we're off for 2 seasons. And then it's 2004. And now a lot has changed in Lincoln. Frank Solich is no longer our coach. Steve Pearson made the decision to go with Callahan, and we go down to Norman, and we had Glenn Snodgrass, the head football coach at York, on a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah,
and he's from Scotia originally, and so I was just talking to him about Scotia, and the player I remember there is Steve Krewald, the fullback, and Krewald, in 2004, we pretty much aren't using the fullback anymore like we would have in the olden days, and this was the year where Steve is really gonna have his season, and he just doesn't get it because the scheme isn't for him. But at the end of that game, we were down 30-0, I think. Had done nothing. Yeah, had done nothing the whole game. And so they just basically hand a fullback dive off just to try to run the clock out. And of course he goes for like 60 yards and gets us into a field goal position. But heaven forbid we run the damn fullback again. We can't do that.
But we got a field goal at least. Yeah.
Corey Ross carried like 30 times. I think that Bill was trying to incapacitate Corey Ross. He carried 30 times for 130 yards. They just pounded this guy, and they're getting beat 30-0. And they get on this last drive, and Krewald carries twice on the drive. And the last play of the game, David Dykes kicks a field goal to make it 30-3. And Oklahoma fans are throwing oranges on the field. And before the game happened was when Darren DeLone ran into one of the Roughnecks and knocked some teeth out.
Oh, geez.
Yep. And after the game, we're doing the post-game interview, and Bill Callahan, somebody said, "What was the game plan?" And I was like, "To win, you bet." It's like that was it. That was their game plan, to win, you bet. And then he said something about then they were throwing fruit on the field and whatever. It was just a disaster. But yeah, Krewald carries twice on this last drive so they can set up to kick a field goal.
So they can kick a field goal so we don't get shut out.
I know, yeah.
2005, we lose to them. 2006, we play them for a third straight year, but that's because we got them in the coldest game.
Oh, God.
Arrow, you were at that.
I was at that too, yeah.
Arrowhead Stadium.
That was the other coldest game I've ever been to in my life. The plus side was I could have some slightly different beverages than I could in 91, so I didn't feel it quite as much by game time. So
I thought our car was going to freeze up driving down there.
Oh, God,
and Nebraska did their best to take us out of the game immediately.
Oh,
if
yes,
I remember right, it was a backwards pass or something to Purify, and he dropped it. And I think
which is sensible in that kind of weather.
I think we gave him like the points right away off of that, if I recall right. And that was a rough era there. But we get through the Callahan era. He gets fired after 2007, and in 2008 and 2009 we're going to play him again, and now it's with Bo. And I went down there. Well, we all went down there. We took the RV trip. It was about, and Mac was on it with us, and we go down there and didn't think we were going to win it by any means, but holy smokes. I mean, we had barely sat down. Your brother, in fact, didn't even have he went to the concession stand before the kickoff, and he got to his seats with about 9 minutes left, and we were down 21-0 already. And he's like, "What in the world happened?" I'm like, yeah. It's that bad. And eventually got down 35-0, and then made the score somewhat respectable by the end. It was like 62-30 or something like that. But what I'll remember is Husker fans. We were 5-4 at that point, and Husker fans, us included, we go down to the southwest corner of the stadium and we clap as the team goes into the locker room. Right, we clap there, and I kind of walked around and I looked down the hallway, the long hallway there, and I see Barney Cotton from the side. And, here's a former Husker player and everything. And he's got his head up against his arm, up against the wall. And he's just he's having a quiet moment, in this concourse. And I'm just thinking this meant a lot to him. It hurts and everything. And it's Oklahoma, but it means a lot to the guy. And I was really proud how that team turned around and came back and won 4 straight games to go 9-4. And no one wants to give Bo the credit for winning 9 and 10 games a season. And Bo had his demons and bad things, but there were good things too. And how they came back from that, I thought led a lot. And then after that game, in fact, what happens, what people forget about that game, it was so strange to be there because we were not the main game of the night. What was happening in Lubbock with Texas Tech and Texas was the bigger deal. That's the Michael Crabtree night, catching it, in Texas. Oklahoma needed Texas to lose to Texas Tech. And so we were this afterthought because we're getting blown out. It was so strange. But we talked with these really cool Oklahoma fans, great fans. We talked with them after the game, and they were like consoling us and saying, "Hey, we were there in the 90s. We understand. You guys will get it back." And Mac and I were like, "Hell yeah, we'll get it back. I mean, we could beat you guys next year." And they were like, "You're crazy." Well, next season, 2009, first time in the Stoops era, they didn't score a touchdown. And Nebraska did get their revenge, I guess, that next season. But that's the last one that we've had against them. We would play them in the final game of the Big 12, for us at least, the 2010 game. Here, I'm going to show this clip here.
And so fitting that the final championship game features 2 rivals connected across time.
He's all the way home!
Across borders, before the Republic was even formed. But territory is still turf, home soil, and the schools that stand on it are symbols of the proud states they serve. So when these teams meet, there's more than a game on the line, even when the Big 12 title is at stake like today. No, this one is about legacies and long-held grudges. This is Exhibit A for rivalry, for what the word truly means. This is Oklahoma versus Nebraska, the land, the people, and their teams.
Mike, what does that make you feel like? I mean, that is the end of it officially, not just the two, 2 games on and off. It's over.
Yeah, that was a sad deal for me. And the fact that they played last year and they're going to play this year, to me, it's not the same thing. It's just, it's something entirely different from what that was, to my way of thinking, because they, being part of the same conference and all those years and how they got in the same conference going clear back, and it just, I don't know. It was a sad moment when Nebraska went to the Big Ten and left Oklahoma, and now Oklahoma and Texas are going to the SEC, and it just becomes more and more distance between those programs. But there was a time, like I said, that was my favorite place to go for road games, because that's what I grew up with. Norman, Oklahoma was the place, and everybody was so cordial down there, and you knew people, and it just isn't the same. And 2010, that was kind of the end of it. But it had changed by then anyway. But not in my mind until the real end came.
Well, Rob, I'll give you one question. Is there one question left, Rob, that you could throw out there from the crowd? Because we've gone over 2 hours, and Mike, I just thank you so much for your time. And this is exactly kind of what I thought it was going to happen. I tried to tease you and say it was going to be maybe an hour and a half. I knew we were going to go for 2 hours.
Hockey's on metric time. It's like twice what we normally use. So.
This is great. But Rob, pick the best one that you want, and we'll go out on that. And Mike, I'm going to also end this. I'm going to have you tell us one story that you had teased us with the last time you were on. So, but we'll wait to the very end.
Okay.
Do you have a question there, Rob?
Sorry, there aren't any more questions. It's mostly just comments from people. So yeah, I just we got through all the good questions. But I will like to say, Mike and Marty, thanks for listening again tonight. Big shout out to Honky's mom and dad. They seem to be having a blast watching this tonight. And also big shout out to all the Redcasters. This is the most people that we have had watching any of our shows since we've started streaming live at any given time consistently. So for the last 2 hours, we've had almost 28 people online with us this whole time. And
I've been seeing over 30 on ours. And this is just, for 2 hours. Yeah. Really, thank you, Redcasters.
Thank you,
on a
everybody.
Wednesday night. Great job. So
thank you, everyone. And Mike, big thank to you, because you're a legend, man. I mean, we talk about all these. No, but seriously, we talk about all these famous players and all these famous plays and these coaches and everything. And from 1978 till now, there's one thing that's consistent through all of it, and that's you. Like, you have been just there consistently, and it's just so cool. Like that you're with Hail Varsity, we're with Herdat. It's like we get to be associated with Mike Babcock. You follow me on Twitter, you follow the Redcast on Twitter, you comment, you retweet me, and to me, like I realize, and this is me swooning a little bit, but like for me, kind of really recently getting into Husker history and understanding it all, I rely on you and the things that you put out there to educate myself. And so the fact that you even will come on a Wednesday night for over 2 hours, because we were talking for a while before the show, and do this for us, for me, it means a ton. So thank you so much.
You're very kind to say that.
We've had a lot of great people. We've had Osborne on back in May. This is, for me, I've told the guys from day one, talking to Babcock, and we've also had Sipple and Chattel, and those are guys I have a lot of respect for. But Mike, this is something, I grew up, every time I'd watch an NET show, a Devaney and Osborne thing, you're always on it. I'm reading your stuff. So to be able to sit here and do this kind of chat for 2 hours is super cool. This is I'm on cloud 9 doing this. So the last time, Mike, that we talked to you, you said that you'd want to tell us a story about the time you fell down in front of Osborne's car. And I think after 2 hours, we might, let's end it on a high note like that. Tell us that story.
Okay. So I'm working at the Journal-Star, and it's 9th and 926 P Street, but it's just right on the 10th Street runs down. At that time, 10th Street ran down right past the stadium. And it was in the afternoon. And at that time, you didn't even have to clear interviews with the sports information office. You could just ask a player, is it more convenient to talk to you before practice or after? And I don't remember who the player was, but somebody said, hey, if you could talk to me before practice, that'd be great. Come over and meet me in the locker room area and we'll sit down and talk. So I go out and you can just walk down to the stadium from where the Journal Star building was. And I'm standing there at 10th Street and Q. And so I'd go across 10th Street and then across Q Street and right straight down right down 10th Street to the stadium. And so I'm standing there on the corner and I'm waiting for the light to change so I can go across 10th Street. And I hear somebody say, hey, Mike, you want to ride? And it's Coach Osborne. It's a one-way street coming down this way. And he's in his probably wheel club vehicle. And do I want to ride? And I think they're playing Colorado that week. So instead of going across the street and across the street, I see traffic starting to come. So I go diagonal through the intersection to get to his car. And I'm not very fast, but I do a little bit of a jog. People dispute this, but I hit some gravel right in front of his car. And I go down in front of his car. Now, I've only been working at the paper for a couple years. And my first thought is, just drive over me. This is the end of it. How can I do this thing? My second thought was, I'll get up and say, no, that's okay, Coach, I'll walk. But it's obvious I can't even stand on my own 2 feet. So I get in his car. Now, this happened a lot quicker than it seemed. I get in his car. I'm trying not to, I scrape my leg, so I'm trying not to bleed on his car. And I look straight ahead. I don't even look at him. I just look straight ahead. He turns, we go down 10th Street, and he doesn't say anything until we almost get to the South Stadium lot. And then he says, Mike, I don't think Colorado is taking us seriously enough. Do you? And I mumble something about no, and he parks his car, and I get out, and I hustle into the sports information office so he can't see where I went. He goes up in the elevator, and Steve Peterson is working in the SID office. Now, people are probably going to get upset about that. And he comes over to me and he says, what you have to do when you go out to practice is walk up to him and then fall down like Chevy Chase, like you did it on purpose. And that's like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm wondering if I'm going to even do this job anymore, even though I just started. But my point is, I don't, to this day, I don't know if Tom knew I disappeared in front of his vehicle or not, because he was so focused on the upcoming opponent, which I believe was Colorado, and it wasn't a very good Colorado team. But that's how focused Tom was. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. But yeah, that was my first thought. Just drive over me. That's the end of my. How's he going to take me seriously when I can't even walk across the street in front of his car?
Well, seriously, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Redcasters that are, I know the comments are starting to come in now for all this. And thank you so much. I mean, this is 2+ hours, but Boomer, this was everything I was hoping to
do. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Yep. So I've always loved Babcock's work. And like I said, some guy who can actually talk about stuff that happened before Devaney is always welcome in my book. And I really appreciate it. So
yeah. And Redcasters, this is going to be, we're going to cut this thing up on YouTube. We're going to be sending out so you can, if you want to watch all 2 hours of it, awesome. If not, we're going to have these into segments and everything. And thankfully, nothing happened. Our computer didn't reboot or anything in the middle of it. So I think we got through pretty well. But Mike, thank you so much. Rob, thank you for playing back up here. Boomer. And until the next time, that's another Go Big Redcast.
Go Big
Thanks,
Red.
Guys.